Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! And video game news. Today is Friday, February 10th. I am streaming early in the morning today because, well, I basically got nothing done yesterday. I had finished, there's a new update on Yu-Gi-Oh! Let's launch into this. They've seemingly made some major changes in here, or I'm assuming there will be some major changes, but maybe not. Version note here. Following updates placed on player requests and survey. For the new update onward, game will automatically update upon launch for Steam users. Thanks for your patience waiting for automatic updates. It didn't happen this time, but I guess maybe going forward. So no more having the mobile, you have to click and confirm that you're going to download things. People on PC usually don't have limited bandwidth in any way, so it's super easy to just have Steam auto update. And frankly, even if you did have limited bandwidth, I think you can disable that in Steam. Room matches between accounts with different versions are not possible. If you're unable to match in room matches, please update your game version. I don't know why they really need to say that. A room is automatically disbanded when the host performs a version update. Let's see. Notable updates applied upon update. Added card activation animations during Duel. Added visual effect when life points is reduced to 0 by certain cards. Dark Magician Girl. Adjustment made to the timing of increases of the time and the time limit. The time limit will now increase at the start of the turn as well as at the start of your opponent's turn. This change is scheduled to be implemented after February 13th maintenance, which is not today. Time at the beginning of your turn will be 60 seconds. At the beginning of your opponent, you get another 30 seconds. So you get 60 seconds at the beginning of your turn always. You get another 30 seconds. It will not exceed 300 seconds at any point. Highlighting of effects. Blue highlight of card text for effects that can be activated will now be applied for quick effects and ignition effects. I don't even know what an ignition effect is. Application effects have been added. You can have an option to hide your opponent's name during duels, which there might be a reason as a streamer to do that. I would have to think about if there really is much of a reason though. Let's see. Changes. Is any of this changes really that important, I guess? They've changed the way the totally awesome mate icon looks. They've added simplified Chinese. Yeah, it doesn't seem like that much. Yeah, Chinese option, new selection pack on February 13th to look at. Forbidden list and text revision changes for a small number of cards. An update to welcome the Duel Masters. I don't know if they've just changed the text maybe on some of this as to why this would be new, or if this is just explaining some of the things that so far I have just had to figure it out. Putting these as notifications instead of having just a proper like help section seems wasteful and just not that useful at all. All kinds of issues and things. Like it would make a lot more sense for that to all just be in the help here, which it seems like it is in the help. So did you need it as a notification? Anyways, so I'm streaming early today because I was not very effective yesterday. I've been playing The Legend of Bumbo. I did see that there was a special ending that seems very much in line with the best ending of the latest DLC of The Binding of Isaac, something that you really would have wanted to show. But when I triggered it, I wasn't recording, which, stupid me, I should have been recording, even if I was just recording the footage and then deleting it later, which that is, I guess, something I should think about doing going forward if I am going to play off screen. I very rarely play off screen, so I haven't developed any good procedures or thought to it. So I didn't get that extra thing. Had I just been recording with my microphone muted, I could have come back and literally record the voiceover on that footage while playing back the footage through just a media player and pretend like I was talking while I was actually playing effectively. Although I probably wouldn't even bother to pretend. I'd probably just straight up admit it. I don't really believe too much in the idea of trying to do Hollywood magic trickery on this channel, obviously. So after I saw that kind of early 2 days ago, I spent some time yesterday trying to finish the last thing that needed to be done with The Legend of Bumbo, and I just couldn't do it. There's some imbalance certainly there as far as the hardest achievement unlocking things. You have to have 45 coins with each character, and one character in particular that I'm playing as is kind of difficult to win in the first place, let alone win with 45 coins, which is kind of a lot. It's not a incredibly undoable amount of coins, but it does require you to be fairly conservative as far as just how much you spend to upgrade your equipment or add any kind of support or increase your odds of winning. If anything, I would say part of the problem is I'm playing as a character that you kind of have to play knowing he's going to take damage, when both The Binding of Isaac and The Legend of Bumbo is really more leaning towards all the characters being played perfectly, in the sense that you don't take any damage or you take very little damage. It really isn't a tit for tat, life lose, life gain game, and when you have one character that you kind of are going to have to lose life, that feels very awkward. So yeah, I didn't really accomplish anything much. Running into a lot of problems with my Tuya smart lights. I really have to think Zigbee is the way to go instead of Wi-Fi, but I'm not certain if this isn't literally just the specific light bulbs are particularly poorly programmed so that they go offline a lot, or if it is the Tuya core system itself that just is poorly programmed, or, you know, you could always blame my network setup too. That might be the problem. Yep. So yeah, I'm having a lot of automations fail one out of every 10 times, and their app doesn't allow you to really say, well, don't bother with that failing. We have redundancies there. You don't need to warn me about that. You can either turn off all notifications whatsoever, which then makes other notifications that you would want to see not show up, or you have to be bugged by the notifications you don't care about. Yep. But part of it, I think, is also just the problem that there's too many devices, and that would be the main thing I'd say is going with a Zigbee network that's designed to have more Internet of Things devices compared to Wi-Fi, which is, I mean, even if you're getting just a regular small office, home office router, the number of Wi-Fi devices they're probably expecting you to connect is particularly low. Yeah, they're not expecting you to have 60, 50 devices, and when you're starting to think Internet of Things, so yeah, that's been a distraction, but mostly I just was not very efficient yesterday, and then as I was either considering recording early this morning a different game, which would have just bumped into the time of recording this, or going to sleep, I was gonna start playing the Swapper, which I'd played this game called The Fall that I thought was the Swapper, and there is a game called The Descendant, which I think I misread as The Descent, that also confused it. It's just like 3 different games where there's some spacesuit type character running around, and they all look similar enough to confuse me. And so yeah, I was thinking about playing the Swapper, and then I thought, wait a minute, if I start playing the Swapper early in the morning, I'm probably going to fall asleep and then wake up at 6 or 7 in the evening on a Friday and start streaming. At that point, there's no reason to do that if we can avoid it. Also, on a Friday, it's not like there's going to be a ton of new news coming out anyways, so early Friday morning streams are fine. Arguably, you could, even though YouTube is, I think, really accurate when they tell content creators that you need to be very consistent, and arguably even Monday, Wednesday, Friday streams is not consistent enough. I probably would need to either stream once a week, which doesn't work for the dailies on Yu-Gi-Oh! And really just doesn't work for the amount of news. If I streamed once a week, I would skip so much news, or it'd just be way too long. Or I need to stream every day, and it's not something I really would want to commit to, but honestly, I could probably stream every day. Arguably, then streams might get down to being an hour to an hour and 30 minutes to 2 hours long. If it was every day, it would be more hours per week, but it would be fewer hours overall. No, not overall, but per session. Excuse me. So yeah, there's definitely some thoughts there. Just gonna add this to my hand now, which is probably not necessary. And I guess the question here would be, could I power up this character to be strong enough to take out all of these characters? No. Can I possibly use my trident character to destroy things? Do we have enough characters in this field now to potentially do this? I guess at a certain part this might also just tell me whether I'm gonna lose or not, because if I am gonna just lose, then better to know now than wait. So yeah, I have said in the past though that I'm definitely not comfortable with the idea, or not really wanting to go to daily streams. And you know, it just wouldn't work, because then there would be immediately like days in which I would say, nope, can't stream today, can't stream then. I can't even consistently stream at a specific time for the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If anything, I potentially would want to reduce the number of streams, but this is the best balance I can find. I'm already yawning. Yep, this was the, I guess, best mistake to make today. It was either stream now or stream extremely late in the evening. I guess one question to ask is, why play Yu-Gi-Oh in the first place? I feel like I do need some kind of warm-up setup. Some kind of warm-up game just to talk over as far as what's going on, but even the whole accountability section at the beginning and talking, it's not particularly well received, and it's not always that long anyways. But I really have no major passion for Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm just sticking with it as a daily game. If I could get Yu-Gi-Oh! To play itself like the mobile game I played, Destiny Child, or if I could reasonably just show Destiny Child on the TV, on the YouTube, without getting content struck for being a little too lewd, I would do that instead. But yeah, I'm sticking to the dailies for very little reason. And I'm sticking to Yu-Gi-Oh! In general for very little reason. I've played so many card games for so many years now that the small passion I had back when playing Hearthstone has been somewhat drained out of me. And that really, it would be nice if there was a different type of game that kind of had dailies that would make more sense. But I definitely don't want to get into some kind of battle royale Fortnite thing, something that's a longer time commitment per game. So I don't know what else to do. Another thought I had certainly is that the Super Bowl is happening this weekend, and I have no interest in watching American football or ever. So, and I imagine there would be some percentage of people on YouTube that are also not interested in watching the Super Bowl during that time. So arguably, if I had thought this up earlier, and if I really had committed to something, it would make a lot of sense to do a special event like a marathon during that Super Bowl Sunday. What would I do? That's the real question. I would think you probably, on first thought, could probably play Blood Bowl and then have a football themed special stream, special marathon stream around playing Blood Bowl 1, Blood Bowl 2, Blood Bowl 3. I don't believe it's out yet. That would kind of make sense. But I feel like you probably would do well to have some passion for whatever game you're playing. And so, since I've never played Blood Bowl, I don't know. I wouldn't have that passion yet. I might have that passion at some point in the future, but I definitely wouldn't have it if I just ran and bought Blood Bowl 1 right now. And so that really wouldn't work well as a concept. So then I was thinking, well, is there another game I'm somewhat passionate about that marathoning would make sense there? And yeah, I guess the new DLC on The Binding of Isaac, I mean, if you were going to just try and do a marathon that way, would work well for me. The Binding of Isaac is definitely not very relevant at all, but I could kind of get the thought pattern going on there as far as just playing something passionate. I suppose if I was passionate about Yu-Gi-Oh! A Yu-Gi-Oh! Marathon during the Super Bowl also would make sense. I don't know if there's any other game that I'd have like major passion with. It'd give you potentially a good excuse to it would give you a good excuse to potentially just play any game that you might have some passion with if you want to play a specific game once every year. But yeah, that's almost certainly a thought for next year, if I was going to do something like that. Particularly doing a special event during the Super Bowl is, I think, somewhat handy in that you're not appropriating anything too seriously or misappropriating anything too serious. Whereas if I was to do a Easter, Christmas, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, any day like that, if you were to have a live stream around that, you're going to have to be a lot more reverential and relevant. And there's potentially maybe an argument around specific first day of spring, first day of summer, first day of winter events, but people don't really celebrate that, so I don't think that there's a great reason to do that. Do like a marathon around that. And I'm thinking marathon, and I don't know why I'm specifically proposing that I personally do a marathon, because I would be running off to the bathroom once every 2 or 3 hours at best, and just making people wait. I am definitely not the person to do it. In a lot of ways, I guess if my channel just became super successful and I could be the producer to hire somebody else to be the face of my channel, I might consider that, but then that would certainly just destroy the idea of my channel being my channel and about me and my opinions. But I'm sure there's been at least a few mainstream video game journalists who have written up reviews and then had somebody like Adam Sessler or Morgan Webb read the reviews as if it was their own personal reviews. If anything, that is a great accusation to investigate against the old X-Plays in particular. I'm not even the new X-Play per se, just the old X-Play. I bet there was interns and just low-paid underling associate level people writing a lot of reviews for games, and then it being sold as if the Adam Sessler and Morgan Webb were playing all those games. Yeah, inherently, call it Hollywood production, whatever you want to really call Hollywood, is their first thought is to not credit people appropriately. Yep. And I'm not sure really where that came from. I mean, when you think about like theatrical plays and such, there's usually a high level of crediting people at the end of a theatrical play performance in which the main presenter is naming all the main character actors and everybody's on stage and everybody's taking a bow. I guess technically the people, the stagehands in the background, aren't coming out and taking bows also, but usually you have a playbill that names a lot of people. I guess just with the ever-increasing amount of money and people involved in making TV and movies, the number of credits got smaller and smaller. Video games in particular, to talk more about video games, are particularly bad about trying undercrediting and not crediting people. I guess I'm kind of liking this new blue highlight. It does potentially explain visually what's going on a little bit better. That being said, I do think I am getting my butt handed to me. I also feel like the timer has been adjusted to be a little bit more realistic. That has been the number one problem with this game, and maybe with just fixing the timer, now I can much more reasonably come over to a news article and actually talk about the news article without instantly getting auto surrendered. Which that's been frustrating with this game way more than any other, where playing Hearthstone, playing Magic the Gathering Arena, playing anything at all has in any of the Shadowverse, like those games had much more generous timers on them. Hearthstone by far the most helpful one. Alright, let's just jump into video game news. Make sure everything's working. I still have yet to spend the time to try and look at the programming for my macro as far as GameDeveloper.com, as far as getting redundant articles. I think it's not GameDeveloper.com, it's Video Games Chronicles that seems to bring up redundant articles. It may also be a case, though, that Video Games Chronicles is just sometimes slow to the party compared to my other sources, and a real honest evaluation really needs to be made as to whether Video Games Chronicles is ever really giving me any new information, or if it isn't just giving me UK perspectives on video game news. Or because honestly, if I could just follow Gematsu and be 99% certain that I would get most of the bits of information, that most of the announcements around video games, I would just follow back to Gamatsu. Now, GameDeveloper.com is much more opinionated pieces and much more inside baseball. So their articles definitely come from a different perspective. If anything, I would say GameDeveloper.com is almost like a stock trader's newspaper, which yeah, would be focused exclusively on business, compared to just like a New York Times newspaper that would be have much more generalized. Very much comes down to whether or not this Zodiac Tri-Brigade trick works. And it's probably why this deck is not as successful as it should be, is that it does just create a scenario where they only have to defeat one trick. And you can see part of defeating that one trick is as easy as just getting card draws for every I can't activate this more than once. That's weird. I would have sworn that you could. I guess pretty much this is in most people's decks for reasons like Zodiac Tri-Brigade. Yeah. Alright, well, video game news. Pikmin 4's new trailer confirms a July release date. I think we had already known that, but maybe the release date is new. I'm somewhat hyped around Pikmin 4. Speaking of Nintendo content, there is also certainly a thought that I should be playing Metroid Dread right now. I recently played the Kirby game, though. I don't want to make only one or two pre-recorded footage series on my for YouTube and then play a Nintendo game that I can't make any content around that quickly. But yeah, I'm definitely falling behind on side forms of entertainment, whether it's playing a Nintendo Switch game that I can't put content on, and so can only barely talk about during these live streams. I also haven't gotten around to doing any Legos in a while, and I have far too many of those backlogged. And I haven't worked on my server in an extremely long time, probably approaching a year. And I had some excuses for not working on it for this point, but it is also kind of ridiculous. Meanwhile, I'm wasting time watching Rydo on Netflix. Guess I can say it does look like Netflix has started to roll out their enforcement of one household rule, this new rule they've made up. Or it very well may have been a rule the whole time, but their enforcement has been just to give a knowing wink and nod to know that people were sharing passwords. they've started doing that in Canada, and people in Canada online are very much unhappy with it. In particular, I think part of the problem there is you can't draw a fine line in the sand fine enough that, or thin enough that you could get most of the people to see Netflix's side of the argument. Because the truth is, unless you are a rich person, or just a worshipper of capitalism, we are at a generation or two now that believes all entertainment should be free, and I could probably make a very decent argument to say that all forms of entertainment should have always been free, and the idea of a copyright and profiting off of telling stories around the campfire back in caveman days is kind of ridiculous. And yeah, the parables of the Bible and things like that, if those were sold at massive markups and people were claiming copyrights on the Bible, people would think that is ridiculous. So pretty much everybody agrees that some stuff should be in the public domain. It's just with the most recent generations, I think most people think that pretty much all stuff from new launch art should be free, and everything should just be in the public domain close to the beginning of it. Art inherently just does not work with capitalism. Like, capitalism in general makes a lot more sense around things that can't easily be copied, which Netflix videos are infinitely copyable, and things that are actual needs like food and water and clothing and housing and things like that. Inherently, people might make an argument that Netflix stuff should charge more if they weren't inherently being squeezed a million other ways, with everything else being incredibly expensive. Yeah. It's the old adage of pretty much every teenage girl and many adult women shoplift makeup because they're constantly having to buy so many other feminine care products, and it's just particularly expensive to pay that pink tax that for all the products that women need. And sometimes it's not just a pink tax, it's just women need other things, and society demands so much from them. Like, basically no men wear makeup. Every woman in the West wears makeup. It's incredibly unfair. So yeah, that's a long rambling just around the idea of Netflix seeming to go ahead with it, test the waters in Canada. They're constantly getting this pushback, and they're constantly moving forward. And I don't know what Netflix can really do. If Netflix could say specifically that the number of profiles you buy equals the number of houses you can have, I think that would be much more reasonable. So you could certainly boil the frog by doing that instead. So if you're buying the 4 profile, 5 profile service, then you would be allowed to connect from 5 different locations, and probably you would want to even bump that up to like 10 different locations, depending on how you're really checking. If you're checking that the device connects to that one IP once every 31 days, you could do 5. If you're checking if that device is always coming from that same IP address, then 10 would make some sense too. But even at that, once every 31 days probably makes a lot more sense, because people are going to be on their cell phones, and who knows what IP you're getting when you're on your data plan on a cell phone, or you're going to be at an office potentially on a different Wi-Fi. So yeah, once every 31 days for 5 separate IPs if you're buying the 5 profile plan seems much more reasonable. If you're buying the 2 profile plan, which is I think the one below that, then 2 IPs every 30 days, fairly reasonable. If you're buying the 1 profile plan, then 1 IP works there too. And there probably should be a lower plan as far as commercials, adding ads to Netflix. Which this is going to be the ironic twist, certainly, is that Netflix may just be pulling a left-right combo of, to attempt to use a boxing analogy, in which they are intentionally just driving up people's anger around potentially getting rid of password sharing, so that they can then come around and say, alright, we'll let you password share, we've heard it, but instead we're adding advertisements. Because that's really what Netflix would want to do. Is the idea of a premium service with no commercials has never stuck around for that long. They've always cheated around that and added commercials. Even HBO pretty quickly had commercials for other HBO products at the beginning and end of its presentations, its episodes of its shows. So you were never really getting an ad-free experience. Netflix probably has been the longest running service to actually not have ads. Perhaps you can make a small exception to something like the adult channels, but I imagine even the adult channels have some kind of commercials to other adult channels. And in all fairness, if Netflix did have commercials, they could probably find an extra source of funding to potentially maintain and continue making some of the shows people actually liked and that Netflix canceled, because I guess those shows weren't selling well enough. But I don't think that's what would really happen. I think if anything, Netflix would just continuously make newer and newer content that potentially people might like, or potentially people might not like, and it's just going to be throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, basically. And I don't really think Netflix would be any better if it was held to any kind of standards because of its advertisers. If all of a sudden the advertisers were potentially affecting the bottom line and canceling their advertisement contracts because they put out something like Cuties, which got them quite a bit of flack, although not really that much. Let's keep on playing, I guess. one of the things I think that Netflix has failed really to do in its wild days, which if we were just to think of the Netflix up until this point as the first generation Netflix, and the Netflix without password sharing as a second generation of Netflix, if that's where you would really just divide the line as far as a generation, they've really failed to go that wild. Like, when you watch like Stargate SG-1 and there's that first episode that has toplessness in it, and then there's never any nudity in any of the other Stargate shows or movies or anything, that's fairly shocking. There just aren't a lot of there really isn't just a lot of adult content on Netflix for what it's offering, and part of that I imagine is because they were late to the party to have kids sections, but they just really don't get to that very far, which is weird because those movies existed, those 60s, 70s, 80s movies that would have Porky's like movies that would have nudity. Like, there's got to be unedited cuts of those around, but none of those movies seem to really ever get picked up by Netflix, or if they are picked up by Netflix, they're buried or even censored. But I really haven't even seen, like, here's an old movie and it's censored. Now, in all fairness, I don't go to Netflix looking for old movies like Porky's anyways, but when you think of like the most amount of adult content I've ever seen on Netflix is like Big Mouth, and yeah, it's not a lot. That weird show, The Triumvirate, had a nude scene that was like a joke, and it was basically just Austin Powers type humor, and it seemed like half of that was censored while half of it wasn't. Which that really just doesn't make any sense at all. It feels like there should have been a whole tier of here are just straight up softcore porn shows on Netflix. Just hide it behind things. That there would be really a decent reason to do that even now. Like, if Netflix all of a sudden said, we've acquired a collection of what would have been sold through the mail DVD porns from the 90s. I don't know if they could pick up the Girls Gone Wild collection and then like censor through a lot of that to get rid of the objectionable content that people don't want shown again. But something like that, or even something like Skinamax content, if they could pick up a lot of that and then hide it behind some special code you have to put in, or extra code on top of a locked profile. Yeah, that's part of the reason I imagine Amazon.com is so popular, is that you're not going to buy sex toys from AdamandEve.com and have that show up on your credit card that your wife or parents might see. But if you bought the exact same stuff from Amazon.com, nobody's going to really question that. You can claim you bought practically anything. Yep. Of course, it is always worth mentioning, and I really am just rambling today, that the way I enjoy Netflix is way different than I think most people enjoy Netflix. That I'm loving the weird Korean shows they bring over. It is, to me, very similar to if I had like BritBox, with the exception that BritBox is also way too expensive for what it offers. I wouldn't really be upset if I did have BritBox to bring over British shows and TV. And that's what I'm mostly looking at Netflix for. I have more recently been watching a few anime shows, but not particularly the new ones, just old ones, which there's a big difference there. And I imagine, but they get crazy, certainly Netflix, as far as people love Cowboy Bebop, let's make a live action Cowboy Bebop, or people love Death Note, let's make a live action Death Note. None of that makes any sense or was worth their money. They've wasted their money multiple times over with bad projects, just greenlighting things. And they've really failed to get just more traditional TV shows. Like, for as much as people love, like, The Office, it's weird that there isn't an attempt to do something like The Office again by not only Netflix but a lot of people. Hire a bunch of comedians and writers who are on the outs and don't particularly work with the Hollywood people, and say make something like The Office, or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, or something like that. Anyways, let's start going through the video game news. Yeah, we had heard the Samba de Amigo game had been announced for Switch. Advanced Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp will finally be released in April. One of the things I guess about the repetition here is when I talk about something a second time, a day later, it's not super old news. This is stuff that would have been talked about at the Nintendo Direct just on Tuesday. And I guess it does give me a slight opportunity to rethink about things, recontextualize it. People often don't remember things if you don't say it multiple times anyways. And I wonder if that is partially why I often have a habit of saying the same thing twice. Or I'll say something a second time, it's in a slightly different way. I literally just did it right there. Using just different words, almost like I'm just showing off that I have a decent vocabulary, which I really don't. That was one of the Reddit things I saw, was the idea of what if you were given $10 million but you can only buy things that start with the first letter of your name, or just any random letter at all. And yeah, based on your vocabulary, and if you can just look up use a thesaurus, man, I don't think I pronounced that right, correct. You could probably buy anything you want. Just as long as your name didn't start with something like a Q or a Z or an X or Y, something that's fairly common. Like if your name was Frank and it started with an F, well, you can't buy a house then, but you could buy a foundation. You could probably buy well, Frank is probably easy. You can buy food for $10 million, starting with F. You could buy a foundation. You could buy friends, fellowship. What else would you be able to buy with F? Followers. I see someone named Mangle Jr. on the chat. Says hello. Someone on the chat at the end of the last stream said they were going to subscribe after I'd already wrapped up and ended the stream, and they did subscribe. So I'll say thank you to that. I don't remember the name, but yep, game over. Ideally, I would want to kind of wrap up the stream somewhat early so I could actually start making other footage. Fusion, Pendulum, and Link Summon left to do. Seems like we also have a whole all missions section now, and the life missions still going. I don't even know what really increases your duelist level. Doesn't feel like that's been increased much lately. Feels like the last time my duelist level even went up was months and months ago. Alright, Video Games Chronicle articles. A Splatoon 3 expansion pass will include a single player campaign. That's the side order. There is an interesting look at, just looking at the screenshot, the idea of potentially having a city or an Inkopolis version of the city that is blank gray, and that maybe you need to run around and shoot it with your ink guns to paint it different colors. Although I don't know if there really is any precision in Splatoon to get the correct colors. This could also be just like a Nightmare Apocalypse where everything is covered in dust. And then, yeah, I'm still not certain whether the Inkopolis that you can walk around here from the first game is actually going to have any gameplay content in it, or if it isn't just a 3D open area where you can walk around. Let's see. The first wave includes Inkopolis. You can make splash tests take place from the original Splatoon game. Your stomping ground. Wave 1 also includes Inkopolis Plasma, which has changed over the past several years with some new shopkeepers. The Squad Sisters will be performing here during Splatfest 2. In the second wave, that sounds more like content. Side order super jumps the Splatoon game. See what's become of Inkopolis Square, the central area featured in Splatoon 2 game. So there's a Inkopolis Plaza and an Inkopolis Square. So the first game is showing you the plaza from the first game and the square from the second game, and I guess there's a different Inkopolis something. I'm a little surprised that that all of the encounters or all of the lobby areas, which basically those are just lobby areas, have been set in Inkopolis. With Splatoon 3 probably approaching a point where it should start to wrap up, it does kind of make some sense that they would think about moving to another region and expanding. They've seen multiple enemies on this kind of like ocean world type world that seems to happen in the Splatoon universes, and the idea of Splatoon, even in the name, it's half Splat, half Platoon, so more on the ocean battles, more pirate themes, might make some sense, and just going to a new land and seeing a new group of people, I think would potentially make a lot of sense too. That you would bring up the Squid Kids somewhat, but why not introduce somebody else? Like, if the Squid Kids are just canonically in the minds of Nintendo the evolution of bloopers, the squids in Super Mario Bros. 1, and plenty of other Mario games. Well, there was little fish things also in the water levels of Super Mario 1, and I'm sure we've seen Cheep Cheeps, I think what they're called, like things like that. And certainly they could introduce new things too. It's weird, frankly, to have an ocean world that is kind of personified by one dominant species. Plus, you don't want a fourth game in your series anyway, so why not soft reboot on the fourth game and introduce a whole new collection of people. I don't know how much more they could really make the game around those kinds of physics anyway, so it is also arguable that the Splatoon series would do well to try to introduce a whole new gameplay mechanic around its gimmick of painting the platform arenas red and playing paintball. You also have a situation here where kids who would have played Splatoon 1 or even Splatoon 2 may have aged out enough that, unlike the Pokemon games, you could take the Splatoon games and try and push it more towards being more mature for the current generation of fans instead of having it always be kid friendly. Not that it gets super crazy, but I could see trying to take Splatoon and pushing it more towards a Fortnite aged audience instead of sticking with it being mostly targeted to preteens. Let's see. Need to do more link summoning, so I'll summon something different here. Moving on, the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games are now on Switch Online. The list of these games is kind of small at 15. It's probably the 15 I would pick here. You know what though? I was kind of pressed for time on Wednesday. So, if we were to just say, look for a list of Game Boy games come over here and summon. They really are warning me a lot better with the sound effects. That's another thing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been bad about in the past, is that I could get distracted doing a web peek, just looking at a news article, and not even realize that my time is draining. Although, if it's putting out the sound effect at 60 seconds, that's still really giving you a limited amount of time to react to, but it's not a terrible amount of time. So yeah, Wikipedia has a list of games here, and if we were just to look at list of Game Boy games as far as this, there's no accounting for quality here, but I think you very quickly would find quite a bit of games. I guess a lot of it would come down to would Embracer Group have the rights to these old THQ games, and things like Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends. Are they really relevant today, or something you would want to play? A lot of these companies are probably pretty old companies that have moved on or stopped making games altogether. There's a massive amount of Game Boy games, just Game Boy alone, not even Game Boy Color games, that were created, and they were all fairly small, and arguably very little of them are relevant, but that's not really even the point when you're bringing back these old emulated games. It's to get to nostalgia. So something like Bill and Ted's excellent Game Boy Adventure, A Bogus Journey, probably a terrible game, but somebody played it. Somebody probably has some nostalgia from it. It's from LJN, kind of notorious bad game developer. Blaster Master Jr. I wonder if that is connected to the Blaster Master Zero series. Bomberman games, Bonk's Revenge. Like, a lot of the Game Boy games were ports, or just not even ports, but different games with the same name. I don't even know what you would call that. Bugs Bunny Crazy's Castle, or Roger Rabbit. A lot of Disney stuff that would make a lot of sense to bring back. Bust-a-Move 2 would make sense. The fact that a significant portion of these Game Boy games would have sold simply because they were portable. Things like the Chess Master here. Just having a portable chess game before buying a Game Boy and having a Game Boy cartridge, you probably would have had to pay well around $200 to have a single game device that you could play chess in a digital form factor. And there definitely were devices like that, but the significant percentage of these games, like Cool World, based on the Cool World movie, that would be a weird one to bring back, certainly. Things like Shin-Chan might sell well in Japan, but were totally unreleased in the other regions. But now you have the Switch, and since you have a Nintendo Switch that is always portable, then there's no special sales, special reason why you would buy a bad portable game. And we have somewhat seen that there has been a considerably smaller amount of cartridge-based shovelware on the Nintendo Switch compared to what would have been on the Game Boy or even on the Wii. Now, anything that has been lost very possibly was recouped with the massive amount of digital download shovelware on the Nintendo eShop. But at the very least, the cartridge-based shovelware has been reduced. Yeah. One of the things though I'm definitely noticing is that like a lot of these seem to be NES type games that were ported to the Game Boy. There wasn't really a lot of confidence here. But yeah, Donkey Kong Land, Donkey Kong Land 2, Donkey Kong Land 3. I imagine you can expect anything from Nintendo to show up. Whereas any Japanese exclusive games aren't probably going to be given a global release all of a sudden because they just won't have the translations. And there's no reason to translate them. Old Dragon Ball games that were only released in Japan, unlikely to be released. If Capcom can bring DuckTales 2, that would potentially. I remember this F1 race game. This was the game that I believe came with a 4-player connector. Yep, it just says it came with this 4-player adapter where you could connect Game Boys to each other and play each other. That accessory was never really embraced or used. So I could see F1 coming back just because it's a Nintendo thing. But you basically would have to have nostalgia for it. And that's going to be the problem with all these Game Boy games compared to NES ports, which people do obviously have nostalgia for, or really? They slowed down the acceptance animation? Well, that was unnecessary. Making the experience slower, not faster. I could see playing that animation when you have... Do I have to look at all of these to make them go away? Like, I can see playing the animation when you're clicking it individually, one by one. But if you click the collect all, it feels like that's unnecessary. So yeah, this selection pack is going away. We'll get some new selection packs at that point. I'm wasting too much time here. Let's just quickly scroll down here just to show Game Boy galleries. It's not the Game & Watch gallery. But I could see that getting re-released. Harvest Moon Game Boy. I can see bringing that back if they can get the rights to it. Hattress, probably not. Hercules. I think the big licensing talk here would be, can they get the rights to these THQ games, and can these THQ games that are often based on Disney products get the rights there? Although arguably, if I was Disney, I would be saying, hey, let's put these games on Android and iOS and sell them there instead, since emulation anywhere is just as good. Things like Jeopardy probably not getting remade. Joe and Mac, maybe, but I wouldn't be surprised if they say no. A lot of these games also just don't really fall into what Nintendo is trying to sell itself as, even though Nintendo has been fairly loose about having adult games. Them personally bringing them to the Switch through the eShop, they've tried to stay pretty kid friendly. So something like Killer Instinct here probably would be a no. But yeah, every single Kirby game should be released. Nintendo has no reason not to do that. Nintendo owns this HAL laboratory anyways. If anything, HAL laboratory is probably the place that develops most video games for Nintendo, where Nintendo themselves is maybe more of a parent company than you'd really think. Krusty's Funhouse probably not coming. The Lawnmower Man, no, not likely to come. Link's Awakening, they already said was coming. None of the old football Madden games would likely come. Although that would be kind of crazy, I guess, if they did say, hey, let's just bring the Game Boy version of Madden 95, 96, and 97 back for nostalgia reasons. And certainly if you had a light amount of games to release, releasing an old Madden every year wouldn't be the craziest things. Mega Man games probably not coming, because I imagine Capcom would prefer just to sell a collection of Mega Man games at a higher price as a cartridge. That's how I think they do it on Steam. There's plenty of Mickey Mouse things that would make sense. They announced that new Mickey Mouse game, and this is just kind of a great example of this is what Mickey Mouse would have looked like in the old days compared to the weird new animation style. Micro Machines probably not coming back. Power Rangers stuff probably not coming back. Although the Power Rangers stuff in particular from Bandai would hit the nostalgia, because you're going to have to hit nostalgia very, very hard as far as old Game Boy games, in particular Game Boy games. Each one of these cover arts is in full color. Remember, none of these games would have been in color. They would have been in 4 shades of grayscale, and that's it. And then it's not until you talk about Game Boy Color games, and then Game Boy Advance games, that you start to get to a level of quality of product that actually is realistic, that a kid might actually play. Yep. I think Nintendo may find themselves in a small bit of a scandal as people start buying games thinking that they're going to be in color and realizing that they aren't, or that they're thinking that they're going to be somewhat quality games when they aren't. Although these games may not actually be charged at all. These may be free games if you are part of the subscription service. Of course, you're getting a bit of a bait and switch even on that, because if all of a sudden we start to see retro Game Boy games getting released instead of retro Nintendo 64 games, Super NES games, then you're still getting a fairly low quality product. Popeye, that artwork is fairly different. Honestly, I probably didn't play my Game Boy as much as I think I may have. Very possibly I didn't play that. Play my NES even as much as I think I may have. I played a lot of video games, certainly, but compared to the amount I've done in the past 10 years or so trying to be a YouTube content creator, that really may have been a drop in the bucket. Yep. Ranma 1/2 is based on an anime that's very popular, and they've relaunched and rebooted Ranma 1/2, or they're just remastering or redoing it right now, so there would be potentially an argument to bringing it to the eShop, except for the fact that the anime is based on sex gags and comedy jokes of the main character Ranma turning into a female version of himself every time he hugs or touches a female, and he's just like cursed like that until he kisses his true love, is I think the main premise, and I'm not sure if it ever wrapped up particularly well. There's also a tiger pattern bikini alien girl named Lum in it that was very famous. Ranma 1/2 was a 70s anime too, so it's one of the first of that generation. So yeah, again, not really a game that you would bring over. Yep. There's actually a considerably large amount of Japanese only games. Like way more Japanese only games than I even thought. A lot of games here certainly are just based on emulating chess or solitaire, things like that, not really doing anything new, or just repeating old arcade games. It is actually, for the amount of time between something like Space Invaders coming out and the Game Boy coming out, that may have been 10 years difference, 10, maybe 15 or 20 years difference between the launch of Space Invaders. Let's say, it says 1978 is when it came out in the arcades, and let's say then that the Game Boy version came out in 1990. You're talking 12 years difference from it becoming Space Invaders being a early first generation arcade machine that would have sold for the equivalent of somewhere between, I would say, $1,000 to $5,000, and being such a early bit of technology that it didn't even have a color screen in the arcade in its original version. Space Invaders was actually a black and white screen, and then there was a film of transparencies over it that made it look like color. And that arcade shape and form factor, those big boxy devices, were necessary to hold a TV, which TVs used to be huge, and all the circuitry and power supplies in it. Like, there really wasn't a ton of empty space inside of video game arcade cabinets. And even now, looking at like pinball machines, and there really isn't a ton of space. If you were going to make an arcade cabinet these days, it's mostly empty space, yes, but pinball machines still very much taking up as much space as they can. So to be able to squeeze that technology just as a major statement towards how much technology improved and shrunk in size to make a Game Boy game, particularly the amount of ROM that would have been necessary. How much that shrunk. Spanky Keys Quest. There might be a controversy if that one came out. A monkey called Spanky. Some of these Star Trek games potentially would have some relevancy. You're also all over the place in the timeline, like Star Trek Generations. That movie, to me, feels like something that would have come out somewhere closer to 2000 than 1994. Star Wars, probably not getting re-released. Then you start to get to some of these super games with super in front of it, but not so many games that really have super in front of the name. I can't help but feel like this was a mistake to actually commit to looking at all of these games. The list is just too long, and this is a nice little blast from the past, but I'm also spending too much time talking about it and not really making a point. These kinds of like Konami Ninja Turtle games, I guess the real question though is, why would you have any confidence that any game not made by first party Nintendo would come over? Because I don't think Nintendo has gotten any of the other old games to be ported and emulated. If anything, I wouldn't be surprised if the likes of Capcom and Konami and other Japanese game companies are scratching their heads asking, wait a minute, you've been preaching to us and we've all been on the same side to say emulation is bad, emulation is evil, and now you're doing emulation and reselling the product? I imagine on some level they probably understand and agree with the idea of reselling the product, but on the other hand, I would imagine they're a little confused. And if something looks to be difficult as far as negotiating licenses, Japanese companies tend to have a culture of giving up on it very quickly. So something like this Tiny Toons Adventure game, I'm sure a lot of people probably would have nostalgia for this. Could Konami go back to Warner Brothers and negotiate to re-release this? Yes. Would they? No. Yep. So it would be better, frankly, to filter out a list like this to only Nintendo games. So we'll probably see Wave Race. It'd be weird if we saw Vegas Stakes, but I wouldn't be super surprised. But anything from any other company is likely never showing up. And while this has been a massive list, none of these old wrestling games would probably get released. Although I could see WWE potentially trying to buy the rights to these old games and trying to re-release them as some kind of collection. I guess it really will boil down to who ends up owning WWE. Yoshi was fairly popular as a game, but things like Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters for the Game Boy, probably not coming back. And there's a whole bunch of bundles, and there's a whole bunch of unlicensed games. Here's a list of lists. How long would this go? Nope. They're not even going to try that, to just have a massive list of all video games. Let's see. Wonder if you could go by publisher. List of Nintendo games. Yeah, it doesn't seem like you'd have an easy way to filter this. And if anything, that is... Well, no, you just click here. I guess that's the easiest way to do that. It was a little difficult to figure it out, but I guess Wikipedia still works fairly nicely as a source of information. It's a shame that there isn't more competition for good, relatively accurate, relatively clean, non-opinionated information. So, you'd start here at Arcade Classics #1, which includes Asteroids, Missile Commander, and Missile Command, and then scroll down here. Just let's assume that there's about 15 per screen. I'm thinking 200 games, maybe at most. Probably much closer to 100. Probably maybe even closer to 75 games straight from Nintendo. It's not that many, even, I bet. Anyways. So, yeah. At best, we're going to see 75. They've already released 15. I would say you're probably going to see 60 more at most. And having wasted a lot of time looking at that list, yeah, I guess these are your best bets. Although Alone in the Dark is a weird choice still. Alone in the Dark may also be the only one of these that is possibly not a Nintendo exclusive. Gargoyle's Quest might be not a Nintendo exclusive also. So this very possibly, these 15 games may be the culmination of several years of work to try to get people to negotiate and allow them to re-release old games, and then finally just pulling the trigger and giving up and saying, alright, here's the 15 we've done, and we're never going to release any more Game Boy games again. It also may be an indication, because there was a thought that maybe a Game Boy Mini would be sold, although it probably wouldn't have been any more Mini. But selling something that was like a Game Boy Color with a high markup and having games built into it would have been a consideration before the Steam Deck. But now, because of the Steam Deck, I could see them giving it up. Also, maybe not because of the Steam Deck, but maybe just because of the part shortage. They may have given up on that. Metroid Prime Remaster is officially coming to Switch the day it came out a couple days ago. Physical edition's coming out February 22nd. I would definitely say get the physical editions. Yeah, I probably want to get the physical edition myself. New Professor Layton game is in development. We skipped over this before. Please allow the use of functional cookies in our cookie preferences. I guess that's probably third-party cookies. Tears of the Kingdom new trailer, collector's edition, and more. Yep. Tears of the Kingdom also being $70. Baten Kaitos games remastered. I don't know what these were. The embed that they're trying to display here is actually just videos, and I'm trying to click on the cookie preferences and it's not doing anything. It's probably getting blocked. There we go. I'll just delete that. Then just have an article. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe includes new Yoshi Island track and Birdo. Nintendo released 27 new Tears of the Kingdom screenshots. First footage of Dreamlight Valley's Lion King realm being revealed. A lot of this is really redundant stuff. It's only now that it feels like we're seeing new news. Here they apparently have a video, all 15 Game Boy game and Game Boy Advance games being explained. I don't know what really needs to be explained there, though. Apparently upcoming games include Legend of Zelda Oracle Seasons, Pokemon Trading Card Game, Kirby Tilt and Tumble, which those make sense. And then Game Boy Advance games, Metroid Fusion, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, Fire Emblem, F-Zero Maximum Velocity, and Golden Sun. Now, I'm a little surprised that they'd even release F-Zero Maximum Velocity, because that's only going to encourage people to ask for a new F-Zero game, which, in all fairness, they should make an F-Zero game. Nintendo should partner with somebody who makes racing games and say, hey, make us a new F-Zero game so we can just pretend like we care about that series. It makes a lot of sense for Nintendo not to make their own F-Zero game series, because the only people that they have that are making racing games are making the Mario Kart games, and arguably maybe that's another reason why they wouldn't have a new F-Zero game, is because they've seen that there is only enough interest in Mario Kart games and there isn't enough interest in doing an F-Zero series or a Cruising USA Cruising series, which they own the rights to that also. Here's some new news. Nintendo says that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom $70 price isn't the trend going forwards. Says the company says it will price games based on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, right? I mean, how can you possibly believe that once you cross that line, you're going to immediately have other companies demand that their games be $70 also? In all fairness to Nintendo, even though they really don't deserve it, Nintendo has been fairly willing to very quickly change the prices and lower the prices of their games, much more than I feel like a lot of other Nintendo, like PlayStation and Microsoft, has been. It's been very consistently $60 for PlayStation and Microsoft. So, but now potentially all of those are going to go to 70s also, cross platforms. But yeah, there definitely is. It's going to be a harder sell if Nintendo came out with something like the Switch Sports game and tried to charge $70 for that when that game wasn't even really finished. Although in this case it is also kind of worse, because Tears of the Kingdom has to now be a very, very big game to justify $70, on top of it being a sequel to a fairly big game in the first place of Breath of the Wild. So you effectively could think of Tears of the Kingdom as just the second part of Breath of the Wild being charging $70. And I don't even know if Breath of the Wild really justified its $60 price tag, because there was a lot of, for the half of the game I played there was a lot of empty open space stuff. Not that much going on. A lot of wandering from one group of enemies to another group of enemies, and then potentially dying and having to do it over again. Moving on, a Dreams creator has secured a level designer job at Ori Maker Moon Studios. This is a weird story in that it feels almost like they are trying to create the next big celebrity programmer. Either that, or a 20-year-old has decided to do the thing that probably every game developer should do, which is to hire an agent and put out press releases when they get a job. Hiring a 20-year-old should be almost a day-to-day occurrence in the game industry, but it shouldn't be something people are putting out articles about. But apparently a 20-year-old who has only previously worked at Media Marvel's game creation platformer, so he's not even new to the industry, he's previously worked, has just been hired. And certainly if you're particularly old and jaded, you would think 20-year-old, he's probably friends with somebody and this is probably just nepotism. On the other hand, 20-year-olds really would be should be hired all the time at the game, in the game development, and they should potentially work there for a while, and a lot of them probably should be fired too. And like, it should be kind of more of a revolving door, that people get in the game industry, they realize what it is and don't like it, and they leave for greener pastures, or they get fired because they're not actually good. Fresh blood is definitely something that's needed, and inherently the game industry has done a terrible job of having young, passionate gamers or potential developers be forced into being QA game testers, often for free or being severely underpaid, and then taking only the cream of the crop that can take the most abuse and be paid the least, and potentially taking 1% of the QA testers and maybe moving them over to actually a development job where you're actually making games instead of just playing games and looking for bugs. Even at that, it's very possible you just move a QA person into a more permanent position as a bug tester and make them work as a bug tester for many years until they finally get the chance to actually program things. Let's see. It is kind of funny too that the designer is going by a handle UFO Lace. He created a 3D platformer called Trip's Voyage, which I may have seen this game, but yeah, I'm not sure. In a lot of ways, this feels like this was announced by Twitter, and that's the only reason there's an actual article around it. Let's see if we can find. We made the game in Dreams. Alright, wait. So it wouldn't be on Steam. I was about to Google it and see if it was on Steam. Microsoft, I believe, owns this company, Moon Studios, but I could be wrong about that. But they have at least a special relationship with it. And they made Ori and the Blind Forest and Ori the Will Wisps. And the next game is going to be an RPG set to be published by Private Division, so maybe Microsoft doesn't own them. Weird story though, like kind of weird story. It's definitely not actionable news. Like, you now know a 20-year-old has been hired in the industry. Good, whatever. If you saw this game in Dreams, which is the game a game development system sold as a game, that might be interesting. Or if you've been following this UFO lace somehow, if you've been following them, you might be happy for him. But that's pretty much all you can say, really. I can be cynical and say that the game industry might chew him up and spit him out, but I don't really have any reason to say that or any evidence to prove it. Just weird story. Apparently existing Zelda amiibos will change Link's parasol design in Tears of Kingdoms. Players can also change the parasol fabric at a shop. So that's all you're getting if you had already purchased a bunch of amiibos. I don't particularly enjoy the idea that they are planning on releasing even more amiibos. I think a elimination of amiibos even now would be fine, even if they are planning on keeping the Switch going. The NFC technology has not been used for really anything else, and the amiibos toys to life concept is just not a good concept, and toys in general being sold, these little figurines being sold, is just not something I think modern kids care about that much. I've not heard a lot of kids talking about amiibos in the first place, but I would heavily suspect very few of them care about the fact that there's a figurine attached to the NFC tag and would just want the NFC tags. Particularly since you have these figurines on these permanent stands, so it's not even like you can take them off and play with them or set up a display or anything. You can put them on your shelf, but they won't even look that nice. They'll just look like little action figure toys that are not posable, not really playable with, have no play sets that go with them. And frankly, I don't think kids really care that much about action figures at all. They don't light up, they don't make sounds, they don't do anything interactive at all. Perhaps if you had some kind of augmented reality element to it, that might be interesting, or even like photography element, but that would be dangerous. Certainly to have kids taking pictures with some kind of camera you gave them, which is why the Switch doesn't have a camera itself. There has never been a built-in collector, like virtual shelf for amiibos in the Switch, which you'd think day one there would have been a software that said, hey, every time you swipe an amiibo, there'll be a 3D model will be added to your virtual shelf to show off, and that you would have like some kind of virtual bedroom to represent all the things and decorations. Something like Animal Crossing where you're just decorating your room. But yeah, there's nothing like that. And so very underutilized as a concept. Moving on, analysts view the UK antitrust warning as a signal that the Activision deal is close to being approved. Let's see. Wedbush claims that CMA's objections suggest the UK knows it has a losing legal argument. Interesting. So every time you get a step in one direction with the story, they just come around and swing in the other direction. It's just to keep people's attention more than anything. The Wedbush Securities analyst Nick McKay and Michael Patcher, who suggested in a research note that the regulator's antitrust warning is a signal that UK knows it has a legal argument. Yeah, so you could read further here, but the headline really tells you more than you even need to know. And that, yeah, I have to lean with Wedbush here in saying I don't think this deal is going to get stopped. I don't think it particularly would get stopped by the UK anyways, unless there's just a significantly larger amount of Activision Blizzard studios in the United Kingdom than I think there are. because I really don't think there are any in Australia. I suspect there might be 2 in Canada. I'm not sure that there are any in the British Isles at all. And that would be pretty much it. Whereas I think Europe has already said okay, and there probably was only 1 studio in Europe anyways, and the Saudi Arabia said that it was okay, and I guess there must have been 1 studio in Saudi Arabia. There are notably several countries who have never been mentioned, so I have to assume that there just are no Activision Blizzard offices in China, which would make all the sense in the world, or Japan, or most other countries. So, and it would be ridiculous to think the United States would stop it. The United States being just purely run by capitalist oligarchs. There's no way. But there's news stories around that we'll get to that even paint a more solid picture as to how everybody's feeling. Let's see. Hogwarts Legacy Early Access release is one of Steam's biggest ever single party launches, according to Video Games Chronicles. I saw that people were going online and posting spoilers to the ends of Hogwarts Legacy, just, I guess, out of spite against J.K. Rowling, is the assumption. Which I guess always be careful of spoilers for new games when going online, but also I doubt there's too much of a spoiler here to have, because you're playing as I understand it, you're playing as a generic character in Hogwarts, probably before the events of Harry Potter by several decades, if not hundreds of years. So it's probably pretty well known territory anyways. If the game introduces a new bad guy that's never been talked about again, and then you fight that new bad guy, I'd assume the new bad guy, if even such a thing exists, gets defeated. I mean, what other spoilers can you really have? The character nobly sacrifices themselves. The new bad guy reveals himself to be related to somebody you already know in the Harry Potter universe, or the main character you're playing as reveals themselves to be somebody. It's a little surprising, I guess, that there hasn't been any content around Harry Potter's parents, his biological parents. So if you told me that if you play as the female character in Hogwarts Legacy, that turns out to be Harry Potter's mother. If you play as a male character, that turns out to be his father. Like, that would be not super surprising twist, but kind of surprising. But yeah, people running around and spoiling the game certainly is not accomplishing much of anything. If anything, that is a prime example of armchair activism and the kind of things that earned social justice warriors their nickname as being social justice warriors, in that they are not actively doing anything effective or helpful to move legitimate causes forward, and instead are just doing very slacktivism style stuff, just lazy actions out of anger, out of spite, out of no real progress. To evoke Martin Luther King Jr. and the Black Rights Movement in particular, as far as my understanding of it, yes, there could have been, and there probably were, a lot of angry, mistreated, abused black people in America who were sitting around complaining and potentially plotting violent armed revolutions and violent actions to fight back against the Klan and just general racism. And that is something I think Martin Luther King Jr. particularly said, hey, that's not the way that this is going to get any good news press, at the very least, or get moderate people who are in the middle of the road on our sides. If we act like thugs, you'll just prove their accusations that you are thugs. That's somewhat of the problem with these anti-turf SJWs online, is that they're not really promoting feminism at all by running around attacking J.K. Rowling or trans rights. You're not promoting any of that by running around attacking J.K. Rowling or attacking people who just want to play Hogwarts Legacy. You very possibly are going to have somebody who just wanted to play a Hogwarts game now siding with the turf movement or siding with J.K. Rowling because you spoiled their video game and their entertainment, their escapism. Moving on, Konami is selling its latest baseball game for $1 to try and reach a global audience. This is interesting. Interesting that you would sell it just for $1. You could probably do the same for $5, but yeah, this game has been around forever, but never really popular in outside of Japan. I have to assume that this Power Pro series, which is not called that, it's called the Jikyo Powerful Pro Yak U. I have to assume that they're selling for $1 is not it's not very much of a game. Yeah, this definitely looks like a $1 game and looks like something that you would sell for $1 on a mobile platform, and yet this is still only being sold on the Switch and the PlayStation 4, so they still are kind of missing a beat there. This probably is a series that should be more popular, but I think they have versions of this game that look a lot better than this. This feels like this is just this feels like this is the first game in the series. Yeah, this is the first game. This is not the version they're releasing. So that is yet another example of just Video Games Chronicle confusing the issue by using a screenshot or just having this pathetic obsession with having screenshots and then not really putting the right screenshots. Like every single Video Games Chronicle article tries to have a YouTube video attached to it and a screenshot attached to it on top of another headline or header image, and it's just trying to be too visual when a lot of times they just don't have the right visuals. Moving on, PUBG owner Crafton is opening his first Canadian AAA studio. They're making a game based on a fantasy novel called The Bird That Drinks Tears. I've never heard of the story, but I definitely don't read books, so it's no surprise that I haven't heard of the story. But basing any video game off of a novel is probably a good idea, because that saves you on the writing, and novels tend to be decent enough. It would be an interesting comparison to say whether the writing in video games on average are better or worse than the writing in books are on average, because almost certainly I'd say books are better because you have some powerhouses who write a massive amount and do a decent job, like Stephen King. Although, in all fairness, you also, if you were to include every single book, you'd also have to include every insane rambling that's sold on Amazon Direct as an ebook. But yeah, if you were just to say all actually third-party published novels are written better on average than all third-party published games developed, excluding indie games and garbage games on Steam, then yeah, I imagine the novel stories are better too. So yeah, it's not a bad idea. Of course, then if you do base a game off a novel, you probably have to pay some kind of royalty or licensing rights to it to the authors, and that's maybe too much for them to spend in the writing, particularly if you're just making a standard first person shooter game. Like, do you really need a story that's that interesting? Yeah. I guess the last time we saw a lot of companies doing that, or a lot of games based off of other media, but that would have been Telltale Games. And we saw over the year that Telltale Games got worse and worse as the video game elements, and became less and less profitable as they had to increasingly license more and more expensive content. Although the Lego games do succeed, they're owned by WB basically, so they have the money to license things like Star Wars and make Lego Star Wars. Moving on, the PlayStation 5 just had its biggest sales week since launch in Japan. Almost certainly that's because PlayStation 5 was finally available in Japan and made itself known. But leaving that alone, then sales definitely were big. Usually you get these sales numbers from Gamatsu, so I'm not going to go over the numbers individually. The next free Epic Games Store title has been revealed. It's War Pips, replacing Recipe for Disaster, which is currently free to download. Q Games is going to bring Pixel Junk Scrappers Deluxe to the PS4 and PS5 this year. The game update is also coming to the Nintendo Switch. Bobby Kotick is starting to play hardball here, accusing Sony of trying to sabotage Microsoft Activision's takeover. The exec claims PlayStation chief Jim Ryan has, quote, stopped talking to both of them, which, yeah, okay. You're going public with some dirty laundry here. You're starting to play hardball. The other news story is they have come out and said for certain that Bobby Kotick is going to stay in charge if the Activision Blizzard merger falls through. And it's a weird situation for me to make this argument or even throw out this tinfoil hat theory, but 1 second, I'm gonna adjust my cushions on my seat. Yeah, sorry about that. I was just getting really uncomfortable. Yeah, they've come out and said that Bobby Kotick is going to be still in charge if the Activision Blizzard deal falls through. I think, much like Vince McMahon in the WWE, he probably just owns most, if not nearly all, of the stocks and shares, or he owns a majority at least, and so I don't think that there's a way he could be kicked out, or not easily. So let me throw out a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. What if this is a Papa John situation? And it's hard to really even call it a Papa John situation, because even in the Papa John situation, it seems like Papa John was kind of guilty of, like, being stupid enough to say the N word in some kind of role play and then allow his shareholders, who he should have known were trying to do a hostile takeover of his company, to do a hostile takeover of his position or his company. And so, yeah, I don't think that it's really that crazy to accuse Papa John of being stupid and really just allowing himself to be ousted from his own company. And maybe there will be a lawsuit 10 years down the line that finally wraps up where he gets back on the board. Meanwhile, Papa John Pizzas, I think they've somewhat recently gotten back to being kind of good, but that they severely went down in quality for many years, or for a long time after they ousted Papa John. But yeah, tinfoil hat theory, maybe that's exactly the case here, is that there's just a real effort to oust Bobby Kotick. Clearly from mainstream video game journalism, there's been no love lost around him. Everybody writes negatively about Bobby Kotick. Everybody hates him. And really, you would just have to be a contrarian, since not a single person has had a nice thing to say about him, really. You'd have to be a fairly large contrarian to think that maybe there are some redeeming qualities in his character. But it might be that he actually is kind of decent at running his job. I don't know. Like, Bobby Kotick very possibly may not be the main problem. If anything, I would be willing to put another tinfoil hat on and even believe a conspiracy theory that Bobby Kotick is actually trying to right the ship and clean up Activision Blizzard. But I don't know. Certainly, I know rich people like him. Like, I don't think this Activision Blizzard acquisition would even have been on the table, or Microsoft would even have tried as hard as it is trying to acquire Activision Blizzard if it weren't for Bobby Kotick. Obviously, they want him in charge during this acquisition. I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft eventually kicks him to the curb, but they want him at least for the short-term transition. Visually, you look at Bobby Kotick here, and he at least dresses the part of a professional-looking person, instead of the like leather jackets and I want to look cool Kojima type characters that you would see normally. But yeah, taking off both tinfoil hats, who knows what's really going on behind the scenes. And yeah, it definitely seems like he is fighting hard to get this merger going. Although at a certain point too, also him talking to the European Union and UK and just like kind of saying out loud what he's probably saying behind closed doors, that Jim Ryan is trying to scuttle the deal and stopped the acquisition, which obviously, like, it's blatant, and Jim Ryan is playing hardball as much too. Um, if anything, the best thing you can take from this is a perfect example where competition is not creating better products. If competition ever did create better products, which I don't think it really did, I think it was always a lie that competition creates either lower price products or better products. In video games, that has never really been the case. Like, what we aren't seeing right now is PlayStation funding the development of more games or trying to, like, purchase more game companies so that they could fund the development of more games or more, like, exclusives. We're not seeing Microsoft trying to acquire other companies while doing this acquisition. If anything, they're slowing down. And we're not seeing Microsoft trying to develop more games per se either. They instead just laid off a bunch of people. They're not seeing the price go down on any video games anywhere. And there's zero expectation, really, that the price would go down on video games if the Activision Blizzard deal went through. You're not seeing Activision Blizzard trying to make more games during this process or lower the price. So as consumers, we really don't have a dog in this fight, whether they get acquired or not. It's more just a hope. We're hoping that our football team that we pick, whether it's Microsoft or Sony, somehow rewards us for cheering strong enough for that football team, which that just won't happen. In the long run, yes, if the Activision Blizzard deal goes through, we may start to see Game Pass Activision Blizzard games, which maybe technically would reduce the cost of the games. But right now it's not doing that, certainly. We may see the end of Battle.net and start to see more Blizzard games and Activision games on Steam, or at least the Windows Store, so maybe better for PC gamers. But yeah, that's pretty much, again, just hopes. Moving on, Nacon will show off Lord of the Rings Golem and Robocop in a new presentation next month. Which, yeah, here's Lord of the Rings Golem, here's Robocop. We have 3 more Video Games Chronicle. A Plus edition of Sonic Origins has reportedly been rated in Korea. It's not clear whether this is Sonic Origin Plus contains new content, though. We would assume that the Plus means new content. It'd be weird to call something Plus just because it's been remastered. But yeah. It also is worth pointing out that Sonic Origins is one of the ones that was particularly bad as a game. Just poorly programmed and poorly received. Apparently, Alan Wake 2 is now playable from start to finish, says Remedy. Studio also notes that Alan Wake Remastered has yet to generate royalties. Which, who published Alan Wake Remastered? Let's see. Yeah, they're not saying who the publisher is, because if you're going to mention that it has yet to draw royalties, then you have to also mention, well, that means that all the profits so far have just gone to the publisher who potentially funded the remaster of Alan Wake 1. Which I honestly don't know if they needed to have remade Alan Wake 1. I think Alan Wake was already playable, at least on PC, so remastering it was weird. In particular, I'm not even sure that Alan Wake 1 made a lot of profit anyways. Control as a game was a critical darling, but I really didn't even like it that much. There's like one good sequence in the game that was pretty memorable, but then the vast majority of your time you're just kind of fighting the same infinitely spawning enemies, and going through a weird story, but not even that weird. I think because of the high praise that Control got, they have gotten this shot in the arm to think that anything they put out will sell well. And I think now they're coming back to reality and realizing, well, Alan Wake Remastered was never highly likely to sell well because Alan Wake 1 wasn't even that well received. And now you have this Alan Wake 2 game, which they probably love way too much. And they're saying it's playable from start to finish, which really does not mean anything at all. It just means you've got all of your code lined up so you can click the run button on a compiled program and make it from point A to point B to point Z all the way to the end. It doesn't mean it looks good. It doesn't mean it's not buggy. It doesn't mean the story is in it or the music is in it or anything like that. If anything, this is the kind of like note you might send to a publisher, but not really a note that you should probably say out loud, because it only creates this idea that this game is close to being released when it really isn't. I wouldn't be surprised if Alan Wake 2 takes 2 years from now to come out minimum. Let's see. And then here's that story I already talked about. Bobby Kotick, quote, will absolutely remain Activision CEO if Microsoft deal fails, it's claimed. Previous reports suggested Kotick planned to leave following the deal. Which that's not really even conflictory information there. Wow, my stomach's growling. Like, if it is probably more hopeful than reality, but yeah, if Kotick was going to leave following the success of the deal, even if that is true, that in no way implies he would leave if the deal fails. Yeah. And even though I don't know if he has a majority share of the ownership of the shares in Activision Blizzard, I know Bobby Kotick has enough shares that he would not see himself leave the job and potentially lose his stock options. Plus, he's also got, I think, a really high pay amount, which is part of the originally where people started to hate him, is that he was just paying himself way too much, and he was getting his friends on the board to pay him quite a bit. But I think he also has a pretty big golden parachute. Here's another picture of him in a suit, looking pretty good, from what looks like the same event. Yep, one of the things I definitely would do if I was ever going to start a business is I would take pictures, semi-professional looking pictures. No, not even semi-professional. Professional looking pictures, maybe not by a professional photographer, of every employee. And honestly, if an employee even changed their appearance much, I would send them down to the photo booth and make them take a new photo at that point. And I think most employees would probably enjoy that, depending on how you phrase it. In reality, you need a recent picture of every character, every employee, just so you can put them on the wall of do not allow back in the building for any reason, or just for your own records. But, you know, for advertising purposes too, it makes a lot of sense to have professional photos of all your employees. It at the very least inspires people to dress up and look nice, or at least dress professionally and look professional at their job. If you know there's going to be a picture of you floating around somewhere. Moving on, we now are going through the Komatsu articles, and I think we can burn through these fairly quickly. Quicker, at least. Tears of the Kingdom has a second trailer and screenshots. Check out Komatsu, I guess. A free-to-play side-scrolling battle royale Dead Side Club launches in early access for PC on February 27th and the PS5 later. Famitsu sales have been updated. Man, it still really just is weird to see everybody in the shorts because of the motorcycles. But also, I'd say this angle and this screenshot in particular of Scarlet and Violet characters is pretty bad. He's starting to see kind of low polygons. And look at the ear here. I guess if you're only paying attention to the Pokemon, that's harder to recognize. Certainly, but even the Pokemon are fairly low polygon. Let's see. Take the big news. Forspoken, I think, has dropped down to 12th place. Still selling 4,000 units. Nintendo Switch taking the top 11 places. Gran Turismo 7 in the 13th space. Nintendo Switch games taking everything between 21, then the PS4 version of One Piece Odyssey in the 22nd, and the PS5 version of One Piece Odyssey in the 26th, and Horizon Forbidden West in the 28th position. And the PlayStation 5, as far as hardware, selling pretty good too. You would have a hard time adding PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 5 Digital Edition and matching those numbers to the Switch OLED, Switch Lite, and Switch. The numbers, the PlayStation 5 numbers, still very much higher than that. 76,000 to 32,000, nearly doubling it. That being said, take notice where the Xbox Series S is. It seems to me, if I was to guess, what happens is when people hear that there are PlayStation 5s to purchase, people go and buy them. And because they're in the store already, they tend to buy an Xbox. Although Series S either was the only ones available or just the ones people are picking. And I suspect in most cases it's because it's as a secondary. Somebody goes into the store in Japan, they say, give me a PlayStation 5. Oh, while I'm here, give me an Xbox Series S too. But it may be they went for a PS5 and then they took the Series S instead because there was nothing, they had sold out on the PlayStation 5s. It's weird to see the PS4 and the Xbox Series X though in tiny numbers there. But yeah, it's a big amount of PlayStation units being sold, PS5s. Let's see, Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse for basically everything has a story trailer. If you want to check this out, this is the game that is a remake of one of the older Fatal Frame games, so this story trailer may spoil things, but if you've already played the game, you would already know. And then it's still a question, in my mind at least, whether we'll get the silly bikini type skins on the PC version. There have been in the past steps to kind of tone down the outfits, or remove the silly outfits, or sell them as DLC, only on PC and not on consoles. First and foremost, this is a horror game, so most of these silly outfits don't make sense if you're actually trying to have that horror experience. Although in all fairness, if you were trapped in a creepy house in your sleepwear, that would be creepier than being trapped in the house in regular clothing. Yeah, but I think the ridiculousness of the situation would probably work against you. It kind of comes off as like a gimmick. Like, there are definitely some low budget horror movies where it's like, let's have the characters in bikinis and then trap them in the woods so they can't ever change out of the bikinis. But even as a horror game, though, this really is a distraction. Just the vast amount of pale Japanese white skin in contrast to the dark background of this screenshot, it does not work for a horror game at all. Like, you kind of want the characters to not be the focus that much. But this is definitely one of the games that is slowly getting censored or slowly getting localized, as they often describe it in the West, to the point where they're going to change the artistic intent because, yeah, no amount of fan demand puts these characters in a bikini. It's the creators of the game that do that. And I have to also applaud having some beefcake here and on top of all your cheesecake, because very rarely in Japan do you get guys in being shown off as objects of desire, unless it's a gay game, and there aren't that many gay games. Let's see, moving on, Monster Menu, the Scavenger's Cookbook, launches May 23rd in North America, May 6th in Europe. This is some kind of strategy RPG, I guess. Yep, that's what it looks like, with some kind of cooking mini game element, which may not really be that much. I kind of enjoy the idea of cooking in the real world. And even at that, I just don't know if I've ever seen cooking done well in video games. It's always just kind of a chore, because I guess cooking really is a chore, anyways. And I just don't know how you would fix that. If anything, I think it probably should just be incidental, in the same way that you might see food very nicely depicted in like a Ghibli anime movie, but never has there been a Ghibli anime movie just around food, or even food being a major focus of the movie. It's just something that's nice and pretty to look at, particularly if you're not spending the energy to prepare it yourself. And I imagine that's as far as you can go with video games too, is that you probably should just have some pretty food that you pick up fully cooked and prepared, and then you eat it, and then you're done with it, and you move on with the game. That the whole animations to collect multiple ingredients and then a mini game to figure out what ingredients to mix together, and then showing an animation of heating a pot and mixing all the ingredients together to give you a finished dish like in Zelda Breath of the Wild. I think that's all just too much and just waste your time. Moving on, Pixel Junk Scrappers Deluxe adds a PS5 and PS4 and Switch versions. It was previously announced for PC. I assume this is a beat 'em up game. I'm acting like I have a lot of extra time today, but I really don't. Like, inevitably, I'm just going to be rushed at the end. A game called Animal Well has a gameplay trailer, if you want to check this out. This is the Metroidvania that has a bunch of animals, potentially at the bottom of a well. It is kind of pixely, but might be a little bit of a different experience. This is funny, it's like this is an animated GIF that's trying to play back and forth, but the GIF cat plug-in here is just not working. Etern Nights has been delayed to early summer and has a spring update trailer. This is, I guess, an anime kind of Dark Souls type game, or hack and slash JRPG at least. I guess I shouldn't describe everything as a Dark Souls game. I really don't know what would make a Dark Souls game a Dark Souls game, per se. In part, it's probably more to do with a the brutal difficulty around the game, like Dark Souls. Apparently this guy can turn his arm into other things, which I guess that's a gimmick. Yeah, he summons a sword on his arm or turns his arm into a sword. Yeah. It's kind of interesting here because it seems like you have this main protagonist, and then you have a female character and a male character, and then maybe in this group you have two other female characters. Like, it seems like there's a lot of relationships and just like co-gendered fighting going on, when that doesn't happen as much as it feels like it really should in a JRPG. It probably does happen a lot, it just kind of gets not focused on so much, and there's something about the animation here that's catching my attention. Yeah, because you have female character, female character, female character, male protagonist, and what looks like a male character. I wouldn't be surprised if that turns out to be female too. There is Blue Reflection, which is almost all female characters in a JRPG. There is this kind of gender split that tends to happen. The Neptunia games, the Senran Kagura games, it's all female characters in that. And I guess maybe when you think about like Atelier Rise, there's a main female protagonist in that game, and I imagine there's some male secondary characters. In particular, I imagine most JRPG games will have a team with one female character only, and so to see potentially two or three, I guess that's what's just kind of non-traditional. Moving on, Pacific Drive gameplay trailer is available. Let's see. This feels like another one of those games where you're driving around. Although, in looking at this, it might be more of a survival game than anything. Yeah, you're driving in kind of a post-apocalypse, it looks like, and you're armoring up your car. I guess the question comes down to what's attacking you. It looks like it's some kind of robots. Interesting. So, like, robots have run amok and you're now having to harvest technology and abandoned cars to get there. Get away from them. Well, that is a different twist, certainly, on a post-apocalypse. That looks kind of interesting. Moving on, a game called Crime Boss Rocky. I don't know how you say that. Rocky City. First episode, Lost Candy trailers. Retrieve your shipment of lost candy. The screenshot looks very nicely polished. I wonder, though, how much of a game is here. Let's see. If we come over here, since it's age restricted, and say watch it on YouTube. Let's see. May contain content inappropriate for children, it says, from 505 Games. Okay. So I'm seeing strippers on stripper poles, in bikinis, and character with cleavage. One of the things that's noticeable here is that they seem to be doing face scan technology and famous actors playing characters. It's an interesting thought, particularly if maybe there's a lack of interest in playing as the bad guy or doing crime dramas on TV or movies, and that would work better in video games. They say it's a first-person shooter, and it's taken a while to get to the first-person shooting part here. Of course, when looking at the first-person shooting stuff, it's kind of nothing. That being said, I don't want to sit here forever with not showing it, but yeah, the cutscenes seem to be way better animated than the actual gameplay. But yeah, there wasn't really anything too offensive that I saw jumping around looking at that video. I could have probably shown it off just fine on YouTube. Well, I guess the video was already on YouTube anyway, so like you would assume there's some safety in showing the YouTube video on YouTube. But yeah, these cutscenes look decently good, but then the actual first-person shooting is a step below that, at least, and it does just look like first-person shooting. There are definitely a lot of crime games, like on mobile, where you play as you see a lot of ads for those types of nonsense crime boss games. I don't know if there's too many in AAA or even single A, double A gaming as far as crime games, other than the big ones like GTA. And yeah, since they're not making GTAs very fast, it would make a lot of sense to make a crime boss game. That being said, Saints Row came out relatively recently. It was like 170 days ago, and that flopped horribly. Moving on, the Idolmaster Tours has been announced for arcades, which it's a little shocking to say anything is coming out in arcades. This is seemingly a DJ simulation game you would play in the arcades, where you're moving up and down faders, I guess, and then hitting pads, which the pads on a mixer like this would either play a sound effect or mute, I would assume. Although you could probably program them to add reverb or do some kind of effect, depending on the device you have, the device this is supposed to represent. But yeah, that seems like a weird mini game if you literally were turning up and turning down the microphones of these three Idolmaster singers. And inherently, if we go back and look at this, I can't help but assume you're having to look down a lot to play a game like this, and so you don't even get to look at the anime idols. And you certainly could make an argument too that there's reasons to complain about anime Idolmaster characters becoming so beloved and getting so much attention, when that was once the realm of real world people, real world anime, no, real world Japanese girls and boys maybe making a small career of themselves or gaining some popularity. Let's see. Disgaea 7 Vows of the Virtuelist shipments and digital sales have topped 50,000. That's actually that's really a large amount. 30,000 of them seem to have been sold digitally, so very little physical versions, which that's kind of believable too, because this is not really a series that I think sells well in physical form. I don't think you would buy Disgaea 7 on the storefront at a video game store for your kids. You'd have to kind of know already what the Disgaea series is by the time you're at the 7th one. For PC and smartphones, Honkai Star Rail pre-registration is now available. It's an Epic Games Store exclusive. I assume this is related to the other Honkai mobile phone game. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what kind of game it is. I'd assume it's a JRPG game of some sort, but then there also seems to be maybe some mahjong mini game, although this might just be an attack that this one character does. Several trailers says it's a turn-based RPG. Okay, I'll leave it at that. The quintessential quintuplets Gatapazu story launches May 25th in Japan, featuring the first year of stories from the smartphone game Gotopazu. So it's quintuplets, which would be 5 or 4. That's weird. And then, so you've got these 5 anime girls, and each one of them have this like little head characters. They really don't look like they even have bodies, but and I assume these aren't supposed to just be their kids. These are probably like moe versions of them, or chibi versions of them. I kind of wish I knew what kind of game it is, but I guess it's just a visual novel. It was a smartphone game based on the quintessential quintuplets. So it seems like it's a smartphone based visual novel collection. It must have been fairly popular as a smartphone based visual novel. Honestly, smartphone based visual novels do make a lot of sense. I'm surprised we haven't seen more of those in the West. Let's see, moving on. The Dragon Quest series producer Ryota Aomi has left Square Enix, which this is yet another example of somebody leaving Square Enix, and yet it is probably a much bigger deal because it's a Japanese person leaving Square Enix instead of just Square Enix getting rid of or pushing out a Western company or Western people. The quote here is, "I've now begun a quote new adventure at the next company," which that also makes it seem like he'd already been working for the next company. This probably won't completely destroy the rabid fandom around the Dragon Quest series, but I could see if the Dragon Quest series got off of its recipe and started to make different types of Dragon Quest games that people don't like, that eventually people might buy it less. That being said, they had like 15 Dragon Quest games they announced 2 or 3 years ago, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was when he first gave them word that he was thinking about leaving, and then they demanded the development for a whole bunch of other games. He says, "I've been working at Square Enix for 13 years, and he's worked on Dragon Quest for 16 years, including the development period at my last job." Yeah. The quote continues, "I've now begun a quote new adventure at the next company. I'd like to tell you about where I'm at and what I'm doing, so please wait just a little longer." Yeah, it seems like very quicker than I've ever seen before, he's going to come out and announce that he's with a new company doing something different. Now, what would suck here is if he left Square Enix and joins, say, Konami. I wouldn't be super surprised if he went over to Nintendo, but that would be fairly weird if anyone with any real name attached or any real like fandom attached to them would be hired by Nintendo, because they effectively can't have anybody compete with Shigeru Miyamoto, as it were. He's the only name anybody is supposed to know as far as Nintendo. So if the Dragon Quest series producer came over to Nintendo, that might be cool, but ideally what we've been seeing more often than not is people go and form a new company, which is a new thing in Japan. I've never seen it before. So I would lean more into the idea that he is going to end up working at his own company, and he'll probably end up making games that are somewhat like the Dragon Quest series, but very possibly not called Dragon Quest, and very possibly different in its depictions or animations, or even completely different type of game. And then Sonic Origins Plus rated in Korea with question mark about additional content is the last Gematsu article we have here. And then we're about to look at the games on Steam, so I probably need to always blur the first game. Although you know, it kind of doesn't matter if I blur the first game or not, because at any point I'm gonna close a tab and it might be an adult game. So let's start to burn through games here. It's been a long time since I've seen a text-only garbage game on Steam. This is another great example of something that I just don't think Steam needs to allow via Steam Direct, when it is just all white text stuff. You could easily make rules to say a video game must have a background that is more than a solid color, or must have screenshots that include things like characters and interactive items and cannot just be text. Yeah, you could draw a line and say, hey, if your game is text only, or the majority of it looks to be text elements, that is an interactive novel. It is not an interactive video game. There's no video in this game. And arguably, a lot of visual novels maybe don't actually have video in them either, but you can at least say they have pictures in them. You know, we have Winnie the Pooh, the serial killer. Winnie the Pooh now in the public domain, so nobody can really sue you for this. Although if you took some of the elements from the Winnie the Pooh Disney movie, they could still sue you for those elements. Characters like Eeyore, I think, may have been added in the movie. Which in part, there is perhaps an argument that if something's in the public domain and you add a new character to something in the public domain, that should just by default also be in the public domain. Let's see. Tal Arctic 5 doesn't look like anything. We have something called They Love Them, which seems to be a match 3 game trying to sell itself more on being LGBTQ+, I think, than anything else. But it just doesn't look like there's enough here on the screenshots. Like when you have one screenshot that shows this, and then your next screenshot shows almost the exact same thing with just a different puzzle board, and then your next screenshot is almost exactly the same thing with a different character, that implies to me that there's really only 2 characters in the game, and it's just not enough there. Nowhere close to the amount of content you would see in something like Honey Pop. 84 cents if you're interested. Yeah, I finally broke myself of the habit of trying to show the price of every game, and that sped up this process somewhat, but there's still just a minimum amount of time that's going to be spent on each of these games if I actually have to look at them. Again, it is Friday, so I do suspect we might see an adult game. May not see that many, since an interesting looking vampire lady, but otherwise this game does not quite look polished enough. Vampire slaying as a game is an interesting idea. I guess there's an interesting question. If this was if you were to try to make a game called Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which there were some games made around that, but a modern game like that, would a first-person shooter really make sense, or would that be the kind of game you'd want to tell anyways? Like, particularly if it's around Buffy, you're really telling stories. The good parts of Buffy are not the fighting of vampires. They very, about halfway through the series, they really show that most of the action sequences are unimportant and most of the fighting is unimportant. And it really is just more about characters and story and dialogue. So I think something closer to a Telltale game would potentially make more sense for a vampire slaying Buffy game in particular. If you're talking just generic vampire slaying, I don't know how interesting it really is to kill vampires over and over again either. Like it's too simplistic that you're just going to end up staking people through the heart over and over again. It's much more interesting to play as a vampire and have vampire abilities. I suppose the masquerade of the vampire role playing really shows that too, is that the thing that interests people about vampires is the personalities and the talking and the intrigue, and not the how they die or how they attack elements. And that's, I guess, in direct opposite of like zombies, where zombies are fairly easy to kill and mindless and don't have any dialogue or characterization to them, so they become interesting in the vast mobs of them. They are easy cannon fodder to shoot and kill. What's this? THM once upon a time. Rhythm once upon a time. Yeah. Might be something there. Rune teller. Nope. Astral coconut. Nope. I moved the mouse over here so I don't click on something when I hit my middle mouse button, which I have a plugin installed on Firefox. Yeah, I've completely stopped with using Chrome, and everything has worked. It's worked perfectly fine, so there's really no reason to go back. So I have no idea if they ever did implement their thought of stopping ad blockers like uBlock Origin. Seems like everybody jumped ship before anybody ever actually complained about it, but they probably just haven't implemented this. Alright, so we have an adult game here called Tits Okay, Tits Fine, Lewd Me Darling, which I don't know what that really means. It seems to be a very poorly kind of CG, kind of half animated lady in weird string bikini type outfits, string bikinis that designed to not really not hide anything, so they're not covering up nipples or genitalia at all. So I don't know if there's a better word to use there. It seems like there's some kind of meteors in some kind of sex simulator, but it seems to be that there's no guys or other characters in it, and yeah, I have no idea why you would want to play the game, because it doesn't look good, and that would be the one thing you'd sell it on. It's $2.99. It's English only. Yeah, it seems also that it have problems because it says clean delete the temporary files, thumbnails, and system created window, error reporting files on your PC regularly to make sure the game runs well, which that just tells me the game never runs well. Yeah. So I would put that more in the category of a realistic looking game, but not particularly a very polished one. I wouldn't really put it in the category of even a 3D CGI looking game, though. Definitely not the Moe anime style, at least. I can say that. But yeah, even though we have been seeing fairly consistent releases of kind of anime looking games in the adult sections, we definitely have not been seeing any Moe kawaii type art styles that much. And even if we are, we're definitely not seeing any that are in the schoolgirl outfits, if that's what you're looking for. Solve a series of murders in a hidden object game. I guess there's a potential game there. Even outside of the adult section, we're seeing fewer and fewer of the Moe art styles, particularly in schoolgirl outfits. This is, I assume, a visual novel furry game, although it is kind of unique in that it seems to be all over the place as far as space robot fights and then furry characters also. So it may not be so much a furry game as there just happen to be two furry characters in outer space with these humanoid looking characters. Yeah, visual novel, anime, horror, post-apocalyptic is what it's being tagged as. Is there anything here that I would want to make a YouTube short around? No, I kind of feel like visual novels maybe won't get a fair chance to them, but here's another adult game. But there's just kind of no getting around it, because the visual novels in particular aren't just going to look very good as a YouTube short. They're going to be too static. This next adult game is Hentai Hasshaku, Hasshaku. It's one big-breasted, kind of chubby anime girl and slide puzzles with several images of her. But several of the images, in fairness, are only slightly lewd in their depiction, so potentially very little content here. It's selling for 59 cents. Claims to be full audio for every language. And kind of uniquely, all the languages are expanded here. There's no fold. And they've just got all the languages going all the way down, pushing the depictions all the way down. It is still confusing to me that you can have nudity even in the adult section in your description of your game, but if they allow it in the screenshots, they might as well allow it in the description too. But yeah, not really much of a game there. So next, Warfare Battle, just like an asset flip first person shooter. Although in all fairness, you could make a game like this and this could be really good, and I would just immediately dismiss it anyways. It's just not something I'm particularly familiar with enough to know. But I would assume if there was something really special here, you would see it. There would be kind of more buildings, more detail, more characters on the screen. Domination, War of Nations. Yeah, there might be something there. My macro was messing up, so I may have run the macro a couple times. So we might go in circles here and end up going back to news. Not Born to be King. Nope, not visually polished enough. It's girl fantasy and adult game. General mature content, it says it has. And then there's a patch, which I assume adds nudity to it. Which, that is definitely where I thought this was going, is that you would see games like this and they'd be tagged with sexual content and nudity, and they'd often just be visual novels or RPG maker type games, and then they would just patch out the nudity and then have a free patch either on Steam or on their own website, ideally on Steam. This does create an interesting point that the trailer here is obviously showing her in her underwear, and there definitely are some romantic lewd poses being shown here, and she does seem like she's almost in a schoolgirl outfit, but I guess maybe not quite in that. There's no coat jacket with a there's no like blazer jacket with a logo that she's wearing. Inherently, this was always the insanity around the idea of Steam saying they can't be in schoolgirl outfits, when basically any Japanese outfit, any skirt and any shirt with a tie could be a school outfit in Japan. That they're not that uniform. Is there a reason to do a YouTube short around this? Well, I just was complaining about how visual novels aren't going to ever get a fair shake. This is kind of the exact example of something that we probably should try. If not specifically to highlight girl fantasy, just to specifically highlight visual novels in general, because for every one of these games that I can potentially make a YouTube short around, there's going to be like 5 of them that I can't. Of course, the other problem here, though, is that I'm not playing these like videos, and they won't even play with my ad blocker on, so that becomes an issue too, where if I make a YouTube short and the YouTube short is showing the video and the video has something more inappropriate than the screenshots, I wouldn't know that. Now, that has always been the issue, though. So, yeah, I guess I can't make a YouTube short on it, but I will give it a follow, at least. Chosen Zombie Defense. That puts a different spin on zombies, certainly if they're Asian zombies. But this is an early access VR game, and based on the polish on it, I'd still say no. I still am potentially looking for better opportunities to make different shorts or better shorts. The first step would probably be to vary up the music or do something more with the audio. I did see somebody make a YouTube short talking about games that have demos for the Steam Next Fest, and they were just kind of describing the games with a verbal audio over it. Here's another game tagged with sexual content and nudity, and it has yet another patch. I mean, wasn't this the exact thing that Steam was saying no to? It really does feel like there's just an inconsistency, or maybe somebody different is now in charge. This is really just a puzzle game, though, with anime girls in it. Not really high quality enough. It definitely would take a lot more work if I was reading out the description or talking about the game. For my YouTube shorts, all I would really be doing would be reading this part here, and if I could get a decent text-to-speech engine that could grab that text and read it, that would be nice, but that would be very hard to pull off too. Yeah, if I could just automate the whole thing. Even if I did automate the thing, then it would just be a text-to-speech engine that was doing it. The step forward around that would be to have the text-to-speech engine sound like me, so it sounds like I am saying it, instead of having just some random guy or girl text-to-speech audio play. Wish it was morning all the time. Interesting. Weird game. I probably do want to highlight more weird games as far as YouTube Shorts. Yeah, and I'm still getting a massive amount of views, or a lot of views at least. Although, it is possible, I could see the argument that maybe the number of views I'm getting is still kind of small. Like, for me, 22 views is a lot in the first hour for a real successful YouTube short creator. Anything less than 10,000 views in the first hour might be a disappointment. Styling Shop VR. Well, as a VR game, I probably would say no to this. It also seems a little weird. Seems like you're painting on the clothing to the character. Yeah. I just want to see the reception on this game, so I'm going to put it on the fall list, but I'm not going to make a YouTube short around it. I bet it never gets any reviews anyways. Seven Sins Lost in Labyrinth. Well, this creates a weird situation. It's a multiplayer horror asset flip with anime girls. But then there is some level of like creepy ghost elements to it. And it kind of does look a little polished, although in the background you can see there's basically no detail. But then it's just anime girls. It almost feels like this is a half-finished product, and to shove it out the door, they just went to the Unity asset store and bought a bunch of anime girls, a bunch of animations. Again, I'll put this on the fall list just to see the reception on it, but this would be a weird one to try and sell. But there is something to that idea, certainly, having potentially anime girls in a horror game. It's basically Fatal Frame, but with multiplayer. And that could work. Mayhem Heroes. In comparison to the anime art style, this low polygon art style from a top-down perspective is incredibly uninteresting. You just can't even see the characters, let alone be interested in them, in that they aren't well animated, well made, well modeled. Sharon's Staircase. Looks like it might be an interesting horror game. Right. This came out October 28th, 2022. So did we just jump into the fall list cleanup? Is that what we've been looking at? Well, this is February 10th, 2023. Sharon's Staircase would start with a C. Charlie's Date. So yeah, we did just jump into the fall list cleanup. Alright, so Sharon's Staircase. Might be something. It still needs some more time. Charlie's Day from September of 2022. I don't want to give up on it quite yet, but I probably will eventually have to. Chaos Head Noah is very well received as a visual novel. And see, here's a kind of obvious version of in a school outfit. They have a blazer with a patch on it, but even in that, you can see here's a girl with a bow tie. Here's a girl with a regular tie. Here's bloody horror elements also. So, yeah. Anyways, as far as reviews though, this is well received. Of course, Chaos Head Noah, connected to Chaos Child with costume DLC, which let's just see what the costume DLC looks like. Seems like it just literally puts all the characters in their underwear. So yeah, there's a fine tradition of, hey, let's get crazy, let's put everybody in their underwear. It's really a tradition I'd like to see Western game developers do. Like, for all the perverts out there, I mean, that's that why not sell to the people who want that as its own separate thing, particularly also if you're making it its own separate thing so it doesn't break the true story. Now, interestingly, it says a portion of Sierra's costumes are not included, which does imply to me that there might be a younger looking character that they've decided not to include. Of the screenshots, I would assume that this is Sierra. But yeah, there's no games out there like that. No Western games that would dare to do such a thing. And it doesn't have to just be lewd stuff, it can be silly stuff too. It's weird that like the Street Fighter games don't have DLC, or the Killer Instinct games don't have a lot of DLC for weird outfits or silly outfits. This Chaos Galaxy 2 is rated very positively, but yeah, I just don't think it's the type of game I'd want to play. So I'm gonna get rid of it from the fall list. Let's see, Chameleon DYH. Why would this have been on the fall list in the first place? Well, I'm taking it off now. Chambers of Devious Design. It's a chamber building puzzle building game. It's 92% positive, so I'll put that on the wish list. Let's make sure it's not in early access. It's a base building game where you're building trap chambers, I believe. Chained to Victorian Nightmare is mixed. Which, yeah. You don't get a lot of Victorian horror stories or stories in general. But you would think that there would be more, like The Christmas Story, which is kind of horrific. Chai is nothing, and I don't know why it was on the fall list in the first place. I guess the thought was that it might be a card game. I guess it is based on a card game. Maybe that's why I put it on the fall list. Alright, I'll give it some more time. Centuries Age of Ashes. We're starting to see less of this happen too, where you have like 5 trailers at the beginning of a YouTube presentation. So free to play with a lot of DLC. Online PvP only. Well, this is well received as a dragon flying around game, and I could certainly see why it would be on the fall list, because I would love to see a dragon flying around game, but there's no single player here, so I can't put that on a wish list. But check out Century Ages of Ashes if this looks interesting to you. Centipede Recharged is very positive, so I guess that's relevant enough as an update to Centipede. Cemetery Mary. It doesn't look that polished visually. And that is definitely the thing about a visual novel, is that it's got to look really, really good for me to be interested in covering it. Even if it's a free game. Like, check this out if you're interested, I suppose. It is very positive, and I imagine why it's very positive is because it is free. You don't have to hold to that higher standard. Interesting. Went backwards instead of forwards there when I closed that tab. And then we're at our GameDeveloper.com articles, and we're already 3 hours and 20 minutes here. And I am very glad I didn't decide to try and record something else, then stream after that, which was the mistake that I potentially would have made today. Sonic Frontiers has topped 2.9 million sales in under 2 months, which sounds like a big number. Nintendo Switch Online adds Game Boy and Game Boy Color titles, which, okay, I already know. Apparently, Nintendo has no plans for Nintendo Switch price cuts. The Nintendo Switch price point will remain as they are, said the president Shuntaro Furukawa. Which, yeah, I don't see any reason why they would reduce the price at all. Even if they announced the Switch 2, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't reduce the price of the Switch 1. I imagine what would happen is the Switch 2, if it is just an upgraded Switch, would just be on shelves for a little bit more expensive, or just replace the Switch 1 at the same price point. Like, Nintendo, I don't think is really around the idea of, well, we've got nothing else to sell, so let's just try and increase sales and get a big push at the end of the life of a console. I don't know if any of the consoles have ever been reduced in price, really, by much. There have been some minor reductions in prices, I'm sure, but it would make a lot more sense to keep the Switch 1 at the exact same price and just bundle within it free online for a year plus one game like Mario Odyssey. Like, that would make a lot more sense. Nintendo and Google get roped into Microsoft's FTC defense, drop in, drop out legal defense. A list of subpoenas included Nintendo of America and Google, which, yeah, Microsoft is going to subpoena, I imagine, anybody and everybody they can that if they think that it would help their case. In particular, I imagine that Nintendo of America may have put into writing something that would benefit Microsoft's case, and they're trying to subpoena Nintendo for that information. Same might be true for Google. It might also be a case that they've straight up are just summoning Nintendo and Google because Nintendo and Google have called to not have the Activision Blizzard merger happen. But yeah, that's a very lawyer thing. to do. If somebody comes out and says something against your case, why not subpoena them and drag them through the mud and waste their time? And because court cases at their heart are built on the pretense of finding out the truth and seeking out the truth, if you get subpoenaed into a court case, it's fairly difficult to then recuse yourself from that and say, no, I don't want to be involved in this court case at all. I don't want to have to produce any evidence or hire lawyers to produce any evidence that you're trying to subpoena for me. You can potentially convince a judge to file some kind of injunction or nullify a subpoena if it just blatantly looks like harassment, but it's not even really in the judge's interest to do that at all. Or you could potentially talk to the lawyers on the other side and say, hey, can you help us with this subpoena? But that too may not get you very far. This article in the middle of its paragraph here goes, it's not known what information Microsoft or Activision wants specifically from either company, but like with Sony, the two game publishers may just be looking for anything that would discredit the FTC's attempts to stop their merger, which they previously said they wanted to complete by June 2023. Yeah. We've definitely heard far too much news or reporting around this merger. Just get it over with is what I think most gamers are thinking, and certainly it's what I'm thinking. Just get it over with, even if it's a bad thing in the long run. Just let it happen. Defeatist attitude, or tired of hearing about it, per se. One way or the other, just come out and say, no, we're not going to allow this merger to happen, or say, yes, we are going to allow it to happen. The fact that the FTC basically has to sue to prevent a merger, I think, is ridiculous. You would think that the FTC could straight up just say no and kill the merger with a single stroke of a pen and just say, nope, this is denied. And then maybe at the point after something's been denied, maybe you then file a lawsuit to fight to see if you can get it approved. But why start with the slow process of having a lawsuit instead of starting with the fast process of somebody just saying approved or denied, first and foremost? Moving on, Jean Guston, I assume that's how you pronounce that, a longtime Assassin's Creed creative director, has left Ubisoft Montreal. Guston previously worked on Ubisoft Montreal's mid-range Assassin's Creed games, including Assassin's Creed 4 and Assassin's Creed Origins. Mid-range, I guess, meaning in the serialized chronological order of release. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot more people start to leave Ubisoft in general. Ubisoft doesn't sound like a very happy place to work at the moment. And I imagine you could go one place or the other. It is also possible that he's leaving to work for somebody else, the new Ubisoft, instead of the shell of the current Ubisoft. Let's see, does he say? Yeah, it doesn't say if he's going somewhere else or working on something else. Moving on, NCSoft West CEO has departed amidst staff layoffs. Honestly, this should probably happen more often. Like, if a CEO is laying off massive peoples, he should probably fall on the sword and leave too. The layoffs continue, this time at the Guild Wars 2 developer NCSoft. They laid off 20% of the staff, and the CEO has also left, the developer, which that does not inspire confidence, certainly. I guess the question is, how many percentages is too many percentages? If 10% of your company goes away, is that too much? If 20% of your company gets laid off, is that too much? 50% is definitely too much. 40% probably. 30% probably. 20%. I mean, that's like 1 in 5. I think in a lot of jobs, a group of 5 people working together could point to one of them and say they are the dead weight. But I would say 20% is probably the absolute maximum as far as a layoff goes before you really know that they're firing too many people, and that the foundation of what makes up that company is going to be shook to its core. Although that may also be a good thing too, because a lot of companies are just bad. There's some weirdness in this art. If this is all from Guild Wars 2, I obviously have no idea what Guild Wars 2 is, because I just would not say that this character is in the same game as this character, but maybe they are. And then apparently Sony claims it's being harassed by Microsoft over the Activision Blizzard. Microsoft wants to obtain information from Sony to help its fight with the FTC, which is attempting to block the Activision Blizzard merger. Now, 2 ways this story can go from this headline. Either Sony is claiming they're being harassed by Microsoft, which, yeah, I assume they would make that argument. This seems very weird that all of this is going down now that Jim Ryan is in charge of Microsoft. Sony Interactive Entertainment, because we definitely didn't have this kind of blatant, outward, apparent fighting between Sony and PlayStation and Microsoft when Sony of Japan was in charge, which really makes it look like it's Jim Ryan that's the problem than anybody else, because Major Nelson has been in charge of Microsoft for many years now, and he got along with Sony of Japan fine, and Activision and Bobby Kotick was getting along just fine with Sony of Japan. So you really do have to put the blame on Jim Ryan in my mind. The other way this story certainly could go is that Sony claims it's being attacked by Microsoft fanboys, which that would be a pathetic claim. And yeah, I'm sure there's probably always some level of harassment on Twitter against PlayStation and Sony, but I doubt it's any level of harassment that is worth mentioning. If you're going to run a giant company like Sony Interactive Entertainment, you're going to get some hate mail. It's just going to happen. In fact, you can be incredibly small as a company and get hate mail. I also want to say this logo looks awful. Like it is almost like a fake red green 3D with where the dots seem to be overlapping and very distracting, and definitely not in line with the pure white background of a PlayStation that you'd usually see. Yeah, well, they're not going the full pathetic route. It says under that logo, Sony is claiming Microsoft's attempt to subpoena PlayStation officials in relation to the FTC lawsuit is obvious, quote, obvious harassment. Okay. Which, yeah, it'll be an interesting insight into the court system to see if these subpoenas do get shut down. Honestly, I don't know how much actual legal force a subpoena has from lawyers. I imagine the process is that a lawyer can subpoena or ask for a subpoena of certain things. A lawyer may be able to even directly ask that stuff and call the subpoena directly to somebody. So Microsoft's lawyer could potentially send a letter, call the subpoena to PlayStation for information. But it may not really have the legal force or any kind of punishment if they just ignored it and didn't respond to it. Which inherently that is not legal advice. If you ignore anything involved in a court case, it's almost certainly going to do you worse than if you responded to it or had a lawyer respond to it. But I wouldn't be surprised if that lawyer letter that they're calling a subpoena really doesn't have that much legal force. And then if you don't respond to it in, say, 90 days or some amount of time, you can then say to the judge, hey, I need you to issue a official subpoena to get this information because they're not responding to our requests. And then at that point, the judge may have some more say as to whether or not he would issue an official subpoena or just straight up maybe even issue a warrant for the arrest of somebody because they didn't respond to the request. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a judge subpoena that has a lot more authority than that. Although, in all fairness, I do know that there have been subpoenas issued by the United States Congress that certainly have just been completely ignored and not responded to, and even that just led them to send people in Congress sending a suggestion of charging those people of contempt of court. So it seems like you can potentially risk it in some cases and just not respond to subpoenas. At least you can try. Let's see, moving on, we've got some more follow list cleanups because my macro was broken and I ran it twice. I really would do better if I had a system to not run the macro twice. I don't know how complicated that would be. I'm gonna give this game a little bit more time. See, this is probably just an asset flip game where you're fighting demons, but at the very least you're fighting multiple different types of monsters and demons in multiple different worlds compared to just fighting vampires. And I guess if you were going to make a first-person shooter where you were fighting a bunch of demons and monsters, that would make some sense. Cave, on the other hand, I think we can get rid of Cave as a virtual reality game. Cave Story, Secret Santa. I guess this is probably connected to Cave Story, which I guess is made by Nicholas. Cave Story Plus. I guess the idea there would be to go ahead and just put Cave Story Secret Santa on the wish list, since it is a free, obviously, like, Christmas spin-off of Cave Story. That makes sense. Cat experience. That's gotta go from the follow list. It's not relevant enough. Cats in Time is a overwhelmingly positive puzzle game of some sort. Is it in early access? Nope. Put that on the wish list. Cats and Other Lives. It's kind of a pixely point-click adventure game, it looks like. But that it's rated very positively. Cat Lateral Damage Remastered is very positive. This is a fairly popular game where you play as a cat and try to do as much damage as possible. Catizens is a city sim. Pretty much all the cat games have cat in the beginning of the name. In this case, I think I would say no to this game because it's just a city like simulator. It's early access still. It's not the kind of game I would play. Catalite 609 Feline Space Adventure needs more reviews. I'll give it more time. Catch Me needs more time. Katana. This one's got to leave the fall list. It's not relevant enough. Right, and so that would be all of the tabs I had open. It's been a weird day in that we're seeing a smaller number of adult games. We saw only 2 or 3 when really we should have seen 4 or 5. It does kind of feel like there's just been some bundling that happens to get away from the Steam Next Fest and just not release adult games. Or very possibly there's just not that many adult games that have been releasable in the past week. Or possibly Steam is just rejecting a lot of adult games. But yeah, we did see in direct opposite of that an upgrade. I don't even have a Duel Live to watch today, do I? I watched it earlier today before I started streaming. We did see 2 or 3 kind of asset flippy anime games that weren't adult games. Alright, well, I will just scroll down my my Twitter feed, and for the 3 hours and 40 minutes we've been going, definitely probably rambled too much at the beginning of this stream. There is also an argument that playing any Yu-Gi-Oh just takes up too much time. Apparently you can pre-order the collector's edition of Tears of the Kingdom at Walmart. Nope. The pre-orders are sold out and the product is no longer visible on the store. So that happened fast. Wouldn't be surprised if I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it goes normally. Gamatsu has a PlayStation VR 2 unboxing video, which might be interesting to look at on Monday. You know, one of the things I haven't seen on Twitter in the past couple days is any of the adult, like, lewd cosplayers that I follow, which they were basically taking over Twitter for me for a while there, as fewer and fewer people were posting things. And so I wonder if all the adult things got hidden or they blocked. I still see the occasional cosplayer, but there was a big push for a while there. Although maybe that literally just had more to do with like the Patreon cycle of them promoting themselves so that people would subscribe to them on Patreon or OnlyFans or whatever sites they want people to subscribe on. I'm still seeing plenty of lewd and straight up nude things on Twitter, so if they are actively trying to clean up Twitter, they haven't done a very good job around it. But I guess, yeah, there's really no new news. So that's going to be it for this weekend. I do want to start playing the Swapper, I guess, over the weekend. There would be an argument to playing Metroid Dread, but I also probably need to schedule some more videos. I'm kind of fine if I don't schedule videos, but it also would be nice if I did. Just catch up and have a better understanding of how far ahead I really am. And it'd always be nice to have like good ideas or new ideas to do something different or do things in a different way or improve in some way. But yeah, those kind of revolutionary ideas don't happen very often. Alright, well, I guess there's no point in going any further, so that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me, there's a bunch of social media links down below in the description. There's also a link to Patreon if you want to support me there, or you could just friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wish list. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.